Timberwolves are playing tomorrow. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Well, we've just learned, virtual audience, that you wouldn't exist tomorrow night because the Timberwolves are playing.
Right.
Right. You know, I'm trying to think when Don Winslow came here for his event in April for his last book. He got here the night that it was the Final Four playing here in
Oh,
Phoenix,
yeah.
and that's when I thought it's so wonderful that we have streaming because all the people went to the basketball game, got to watch Don later, and
Yeah.
it sold all the books like it normally does. But I used to have a lot of anxiety about conflicting events or tragic
Mhm.
weather. And now I don't have them anymore. As long as the author can actually get here,
Yes.
that's all we need. It's wonderful. It's a legacy of COVID. So it is. It is the only really good thing that happened from COVID is that
Yeah, it
we
really
got
is.
better streaming
Yeah.
and Zoom. So anyway, I thank you all, virtual audience, for watching, and I thank you all who are actually here. And I apologize to anyone who got the Harlan Coben, Minnesota email, which was actually not my fault, but I felt so stupid. Anyway, we do have Matt here, and I am going to forever quote the line in the book that said, Minnesotans are so nice they could be Canadians. I mean, I just thought that was the most wonderful. I sent your book to John Sanford
Yeah. Oh, that's
because I
nice.
knew he would absolutely love that line, even though he now lives in New Mexico.
Yes.
But, there we are. So, first of all, tell us what's going to happen to Neil Shapiro. They have thoughtfully, finally reissued those wonderful books in paperback.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this for sure. My book next year that comes out April 15th is called The Murder Show. And Nils appears in 3 chapters of that.
Oh, good.
So I am setting up his return. That's all I know for sure. Although I also know for sure that I'm about 35,000 words into his return. So that book, one way or another, will be coming back.
Oh, joy.
Yes.
I am so glad. I thought Gone to Dust had one of the absolute most fabulous, forensic thwarting
Yes.
plot. I don't want to tell anybody who hasn't watched it, but it's really brilliant. So I'm glad that we have all of them
It's the
again.
number one question I get, both at book events and at and being contacted by readers from all over is when's Nils coming back? When's Nils coming back? So one way or another, he will be back. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to hear
Yeah.
that. One of the good news things is, and publishers, go up and down and so forth, but Matt's publisher was not as invested in mystery when you started writing for them, but now they are.
They are,
And
they've
that
been
makes a big difference.
wonderful.
Yeah.
My publisher, Forge, which is an imprint of Macmillan, has been great. I mean, just the fact that they're re-releasing the Nils books in trade paperback. And I've loved all my covers, but my cover for The Murder Show, which is next year, it's my favorite title and it's my favorite cover.
I'm so glad
So
to hear
I'm
that.
very excited about that. Yeah.
And you're coming in April, so for once you won't have
Yes.
to roast here in Phoenix.
Yeah,
How exciting.
that's true. It'll be
I
under
know.
100.
I always remember John, who at one point was publishing in July, and he came to do an event, and, I looked over at him. He was white as a sheet. And I said, John, are you sick? And he said, the temperature doubled since I got on the plane.
Yeah.
And it was like 110 or
Yeah.
something, So it'd be nice to have you back in April.
Yeah, that will be nice.
But meantime, and this is a book I don't think actually is likely to have a sequel, although I could be wrong.
I don't think so. It's a standalone.
I don't think so
It
either.
was
Yeah.
This is the 3rd standalone I've written now.
Right.
Yes.
I think you wrapped this one up.
Yeah.
And I love the one last year, which I thought had lots of surprises. But
Yeah.
again, I thought, once you do all that, once you torture all those people, and all, it's really hard to. Well, it is.
It is.
It's really
It
hard to
is.
bring them back, and like nothing ever happened.
It is. And the standalones I write a little more on the ending because they are standalones, and I want the reader who's invested this time with the characters to feel like they know where those characters are going. So with the series, I feel the endings can be a little shorter because there will be another book, and you'll find out then.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your career before you became a writer, because I remember when we first met, you were somewhat tentative about being a published author. Do you remember that? Where were we in
I might have just
BoucherCon or something?
nervous. Might have been the
Yeah,
word. It was probably
yeah, I
BoucherCon
think it
in
was.
New Orleans.
Yeah,
Uh, that was before my first book came out, and before that I wrote television.
right.
So I wrote TV starting from when I was 24 years old, and I did that for 30 years uh, before I wrote my first book.
Well, I do
Yeah.
remember you're sort of clutching me, like, is this really going to work? And all the rest, but I know, well, you did, and that's great. One of the wonderful things about having a store for so long is that we have been on the entire arc of many authors' career. I mean, from
Yeah.
their very first book, Graham Moore, who was here last night,
Hmm.
we did his opening event for the Sherlockian.
Wow.
Michael Connolly, who says he
Yeah.
did his first event here, and when time comes, he'll do his last event,
Yes.
which I was terrified. He actually was thinking about that in December. Made me very
Oh,
nervous.
I hope he's not.
Well,
Yeah.
he ultimately said, so I'm not being out of school here because there were hundreds of people there he was talking to, that he had decided to cut back on the whole film thing because he had such good people, and to focus back on the
Yeah.
writing, but he couldn't really do both anymore.
I was amazed to hear that he was in the writing room
Yeah,
as much as he was, because those are long days. They're emotionally draining days.
especially
Uh,
if it's your book they're rewriting.
yeah, and you have to listen to all these other people talk and pretend you like their ideas. It's
Yeah, right.
exhausting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it really is, and I mean, it's been 33 years. So
Yeah.
I'm older, but Michael's also older.
Yeah.
And there we are. Anyway,
Yes.
let's talk about Still Waters,
Yeah.
which I think is that. Did you always have that in? We can't talk about it, damn it. But
We can't talk. That's the one thing about mysteries. Yeah.
well, I know. But
Yeah.
did you always have that particular ending in mind, or did it develop as you wrote the book?
It developed as I wrote the book.
I wondered if
These
it did.
all of my books are like that. I know a little bit about them, and that little bit is enough to get me going. And then I trust. I'm at that point in my career where I just trust I will figure it out. And if I don't figure it out, there are plenty of people who will tell me I did not figure it out. But I did not know the ending until uh, uh, I got there. I mean, I knew it before I got there, but maybe 25 or 30% of the way through the book, then I kind of figured out
Well, there
where
were
that was
there
going
were
to go.
several ways it could go,
Yeah.
and I figured that you probably, what is it Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it, which I've always loved, and I
Yeah.
sort of wondered if that was.
Well, part of that is the way just my belief in about how a mystery should be written, that there should be several legitimate possible uh, ones who've done it. And
Motivations and
yeah,
and actors, yeah.
yes. And so sometimes you don't have to pick right away as a writer. You want to have a cast of characters who all have some motivation to or are doing something they shouldn't be, but maybe it's not that thing that is being investigated. And so as a writer, I have options, and I want the reader to feel like it's fair at the end, that it didn't come out of nowhere. Like,
No, this one
yeah,
doesn't come out of nowhere, but I
yeah,
defy many readers to actually figure this one out. I'm pretty good, and I
yeah,
was surprised. So I thought, and actually, I thought the last book, the name of which is I'm
a good
blanking.
family.
Thank you. A Good
Yes,
Family. I thought maybe that one you did have to arrive at it sooner because of all the physical configuration and stuff that was
yeah,
involved.
I did. Well, yeah, I
There
had to go
had to be
back and
some
fix it.
reason for it to be
Yes,
that way.
yes, that one I did know earlier on. Yeah,
I thought so. All
yeah.
right, so introduce us to the cast in Still Waters.
So Still Waters is about two siblings named Gabe and Liv Alstrom, and they grew up in northern Minnesota on Leech Lake, which is a real lake. They're Irish twins. They're 12 months apart, and they have never got along with each other. They have no memory of getting along. And in fact, when they graduated from high school, they wanted to get as far apart from each other as they could. Liv moved to New York. Gabe moved to California. And for the past 20 years, they really haven't had much contact with each other. And the book starts, they have an older brother. He's half a generation older. The book starts when Mac, their older brother's wife, calls and says that Mac has died. He's died of a seizure. It was unexpected. And he lives in Chicago, and there's going to be a funeral. And so 5 minutes after they get off the phone, they receive an email from their dead brother saying, if I die, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't natural, I was murdered. And so how that happened was Mac thought someone was trying to kill him, and he put an email in his outbox scheduled to be sent to his siblings the next day. And every day he woke up alive, he bumped it to the next day. So when he died, the email sent. And so Liv and Gabe, who are not thrilled about seeing each other, go back to Chicago for the funeral. And they talk to his widow. They talk to some other people who knew Mac about, is there any validity to this claim that he was murdered? And they hear some more strange things about their brother that they didn't know, and what their brother claimed about their family that was news to them. And so they go up. The bulk of the book takes place on Leech Lake at the resort where they grew up, which is still in the family. It's owned by their uncle, and they try to find out if there's any validity to their brother's claim or if he was just nuts. And they uncover a whole bunch of things in a small town that holds its secrets well.
I really love the time in Chicago because I'm actually,
Yeah.
not from Chicago, but Winnetka right up
Yeah.
north. And, Ken Kruger has placed at least one of his books. He
Mhm.
has time in Winnetka,
Yeah.
but not even Chicago. So that's always fun to, spend time there.
Yeah, my stepdaughter goes to school there. And when I was a kid, for 3 years, I lived in Highland Park.
Oh, okay.
So,
So you were right up the road
yeah.
then. Yep. Yeah, but it's always a surprise to me for a huge city. There are very few crime writers in Chicago.
That's true.
I mean, even Phoenix, which doesn't have a great number, I think Chicago is so underrepresented. We have Sarah Paretsky. We had for a while. I'm going blank on his name. It will come to me. Michael something.
Tracy Clark.
Yeah, and Ian K. Smith, who's
Mhm.
another black author who writes.
Right.
But for a city like that, it should have
You
a
would
big,
think.
Boston, which is tiny. It's like there's a crime writer
Yeah.
on every block.
Yeah. And
Seattle
Minneapolis has
and
quite a few.
Minneapolis, absolutely,
Yeah.
and in Seattle and Santa Fe. I mean,
Yeah.
and I've never quite understood what there is about Chicago. I mean, the
I guess
weather's
there's just-
terrible, but it's just as bad in
But
the
good
Twin
weather
Cities.
bad weather is excellent for crime
Yeah.
fiction. Yeah.
I just, well,
Yeah.
it's true.
I think in my first book, Gone to Dust, in the acknowledgments, I thank bad weather for keeping me inside reading and writing so much.
Well, there's that, and also
Yeah.
I think it's easier to disguise yourself if everybody's bundled up in,
That's true.
padded coats
Yeah.
and hoodies and all. You don't look as though you've put on your hoodie to go out and score at the the bodega down the street. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful city. It has any number. Last night, Matthew and I were talking about
Mhm.
it. It has a very vibrant cultural life. There are all these
Very.
great institutions there,
Yeah.
and I keep thinking, why? Why isn't anybody writing about it? So I was thrilled to
Yeah.
have a couple of chapters from you set
oh,
in
good.
Chicago. And then it isn't that far. So they actually rent a car and drive, don't they, up to Leech Lake?
They drive. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a bit of a drive up there, but they.
Yeah, but connecting flights are probably horrible. So
Yeah, and then you have to drive to Minneapolis and then rent a car and then drive. By the time you do all that, it's just easier to drive.
easier to
Yeah.
drive, right? And also, it's nice for them to have that mobility when they
Yes.
get there. It's, I often wonder what, if you're trying to write a mystery and everybody's taking Uber all the time, it just seems like it would be a big interruption.
It is hard to write mysteries set in present day because, if someone lies about who they are, everybody else can just go Google them and find out that it is really quite difficult.
It's cut into private eye work.
Yeah, it has.
You know,
Yeah.
it used to be that, especially here in Phoenix, there where so many people are new, that people who use like online dating services and all would often hire private eyes to investigate because, you know, a person could just make up a whole history. But you're right, increasingly, if people lead their lives online, for example, the Gilbert Goons, who we all, you know, are getting convicted because they managed to lead, you know, I mean, kids post all this stuff and are then surprised when they're held accountable
And
for it.
real private eyes, the majority of their work is online now. They're on the computer.
I know the old Archie Goodwin, you know, out on the street while Nero Wolfe was up, you know, spraying the orchids, doesn't actually work very well. And the whole term gumshoe really doesn't apply much anymore, does it?
Yeah. No, it's definitely different. Yeah.
Okay, so you have your two siblings, and they arrive. Their parents are both dead, right?
Parents are both deceased.
Right.
Both died before they graduated high school, and they're
No. Wait, you mean the parents died before the two kids?
before the two kids.
Right. The parents graduated.
No, the parents graduated
right,
high school.
Okay, just get it straight.
That is, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, the parents died relatively young,
Yes, they did.
and when that happened, their brother Mac came back. He had also left until they finished high school.
Right.
And their uncle now owns the resort.
Right. It was they didn't want it, or wasn't that
They did not want it.
And there was some kind of agreement with the dad.
And there was an agreement that if the uncle didn't want it, he had to offer it to them first if they wanted to buy it.
Right.
So there's modern day land issues addressed in the book, not in a boring way, but there is a relative who's interested in getting that property and turning it into a independent power station, which is something that's happening now in rural areas. That rural areas are developing their own solar and wind power stations, which everything's local, so they don't have to transport power over hundreds of miles of power lines, which is very inefficient. There's a lot of loss.
They can also lease property to cell towers, and apparently you would make a lot of money if you do that. The rental for cell towers is extraordinary.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people who want that land, and that plays into the story.
Yeah.
Other resort owners, members of their own family.
Well, we're seeing that all over. We see it here in Phoenix. I mean, Phoenix has been a real estate boom and bust economy since I first came here in 1950. There were 2 paved roads in Scottsdale. The city wasn't yet incorporated. You had to take a buckboard from Terminal 1 to the Camelback Inn. It was a day trip to Taliesin, and the city limits were 24th and Camelback.
Yeah, that's when Old Town was called Newtown.
It was, I mean, it's really hard to, in my lifetime to recognize how Scottsdale has become this, totally different.
And a lot of Minnesotans here. Yeah.
In the winter.
In the winter. They go to 2 places, Scottsdale or the Gulf Coast of Florida. That's it.
Right. And Midwesterners always kind of divided that way.
Yeah.
Easterners tend to go just to Florida.
Yeah.
But we see in the winter many, many people from Minnesota, from Chicago, from Iowa, Kansas, and all. But we also have a ton of Canadians that come here. And, so our population is very different. But COVID...
I think you can charge them extra for the books. Does it still say that on the back?
It does.
They'll pay it.
They'll pay it if they're here, but unfortunately, Canadians have to pay a tariff if we ship books to Canada. It costs $24 for them in shipping. We charge $7. And the Canadian government charges the rest, which the post office collects and remits to them.
Wow.
I know. It's really too bad. So,
but their college is free, and so is their health care. So that makes up for it.
That's true. Maybe it's helping. It's in fact, I think it's part of that general GST, tax. I don't know if it's an actual tariff. I might be incorrect in saying that. It may be that they just don't forgive the tax. We have authors that we support who either lived in the States or sell in the States, and they actually have figured out a deal where they drive from Toronto across the border into upper New York State where there is a UPS facility
Oh,
where they and a coffee house across the
yeah.
street, and so the books go to the
Book
UPS.
mules.
They are.
Bring them across the
Yep.
border. Yeah.
And well, no, they come across the border. The
Oh.
author does. The books stay in the United
Oh, I
States,
see.
but the authors will drive from Toronto into, I can't remember what the name of it is, upstate New
Right.
York, where they pick up the books at the UPS store, take them across the street, have their coffee and everything, sign all their books, take them back to the UPS
I
store,
see.
where we have
Oh,
sent labels,
yeah.
and then they go home. And I really appreciate the effort that they gone to. There's a wonderful fantasy author called Kevin Hearn who lived in Tempe for years
Hmm.
and now lives in Canada. So he has to do that all the time
Mm.
for us. So he's taught the other Canadians how to do that. Right? We have a whole system.
Yeah.
But it's too bad because it would certainly be easier if they
Yeah.
didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Be careful in Minnesota
All
if
right.
you sneak across the border.
Yeah.
And that's another thing too to remember is that Minnesota's a border state.
It is a border
You
state.
know, I mean, we're also focused on the southern border. I think that we often forget Maine, for example. Writers
Yeah.
like Paul Doiron, who is so wonderful. The Canadian border is a big part
Yeah.
of what his Mike Bowditch, his
Hmm.
park, ranger does.
Yeah.
And certainly Ken Kruger has wandered back and forth across
Oh,
the
yeah.
border. Montana is another one where some of the Montana authors also,
Yeah.
because it too is a
And in
It's a
Minnesota
border.
with the water, the boundary waters,
right. It's a
where a lot
watery
of
border.
where a
Yeah.
lot of Kent's books
Yes.
take place, sometimes you don't know which side you're on. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and certainly the First Nation people, to use
Yes.
the Canadian term,
Yeah.
didn't care. It's an
Right.
artificial boundary.
Yes.
So for them, and that's true. I'm trying to think. It's the Tohono O'odham in southern Arizona. The Mexican border
Right.
doesn't really work for them.
Right.
So I mean, because borders really are just artificial
They
lines
are.
drawn across.
Yeah.
Have you haven't actually utilized a border issue in one of your books yet?
I
have you?
did in
Which one?
my second book, Broken Ice.
Okay.
There is, let's see, how can I do this without giving the whole book away? It takes place largely in Warroad, Minnesota, which is a real town that's
Okay.
6 miles south of the Canadian border. And
Oh,
there,
that's the one with the ice hockey, isn't it?
yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm coming back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so there is some activity in that border. I talk about the slash, which is a cleared area that goes all the way from Maine
That's right.
to Washington State, and sometimes that type of border is easier to illegally cross than the southern border, which is being watched more carefully.
Well, I think we paid more attention to the Canadian border at 9/11 when those guys
Yes.
came across
Yeah.
into where there was very weak border security and wherever it was came into Maine or Massachusetts and eventually got to Boston. I think wherever they got to
Yeah.
fly, where they
Yeah.
ended up, but they had come across the border. So I think that tightened up a lot of
It did.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't just like wave your driver's license anymore.
No, you can't. But so much of it, I mean, it's so big and it's so isolated in
Right.
the wilderness. It's tough. I mean, they have drones, they have infrared cameras and things, but it's still tough.
You bet it
Yeah.
is. So back to the resort in Minnesota.
Yeah.
We keep digressing, but that's what we do. And that's partly because we can't actually talk about the book all that much, so we
Yeah.
have to figure out other
There's a
things
lot
to
of-
talk about.
There's a lot. I mean, Leech Lake is a real place, and that was my editor's biggest comment. Was like, do we have to call it Leech Lake? Leeches are disgusting, and I'm like, yeah, but it really is a place that people know, so it remained Leech Lake, and there is a lot of local color, small town that anyone who's been up there. There's a bunch of retired people called funsters. They have matching windbreakers, and they're just always around town doing things. There's polka bands. There's
Why polka bands?
well, there's just because I think in Minnesota and Wisconsin, probably the Dakotas as well. I think Lawrence Welk was a Dakota person. The polka is alive and well. Uh,
Wow, just like square dancing when
yeah,
I was
very
a kid.
much.
I was really good at square dancing. I even had the skirt, the whole thing.
And so the people, so that's going on. One fun thing in the book that uh, is there's an ice out competition. So it's April when the book takes place, and this town has a tradition of putting an old car out on the ice, and it's tied to a cable, and
But
everybody.
the first one wasn't.
The first one
Was not tied
The
to a
first one
cable.
was not. Yeah, I tell the backstory of the story about a ice fisherman who was quite curmudgeonly and wouldn't listen to anyone, and he drove his car out there and used that as an ice house. And when everyone else was pulling their uh, houses off the lake because they thought they were going to fall through, he was sure he had a couple more weeks left, and it went through. And that started a tradition of putting an old car out on the ice, and everyone in town buys a guesses the date it's going to fall through. And so there's a lot of little local Minnesota things like that spread throughout the story. Surf and turf night is beef and walleye. It's not lobster. So there's a lot of Minnesota color in there.
So, who would be the bulk of the tourists that would come to Leak Lake and try to get
Leech Lake,
Leak?
yeah.
I can't say it.
Well,
In the
people,
summer.
Chicagoans,
Okay.
people from St. Louis, definitely from the Twin Cities.
Okay.
Those are I would say pardon me? Yeah, they go up north. And, on the East Coast, they call them cottages. In the Midwest, we call them cabins.
Right.
And a lot of these properties have been in people's families for generations. And there's quite a tradition of going up north in the summer.
So
Yeah.
the resort is still a going concern, even though there are people who want to snatch
Oh
it.
yeah, it very much is, and it takes place now. The resort is partially owned by a uh, resort company. The family has sold a percentage of it, and so there's modern day marketing. There's a lot of the Outboard Motor Association is there when the book starts. There's a lot of corporate events up there now, and there's a yoga center, and it's changed since Gabe and Liv grew up. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So they're there trying to determine what happened to their brother.
To their brother, and then the more they find out about the brother, the more they hear about their parents. They're still the caretaker when they were children. The same caretaker is there.
He's a really fascinating character.
Yeah, he is
Um,
mentally disabled, if that's the right term. They actually,
Is it neurodivergent today? Is that different?
yeah, it's not autism. It's some. He is
Was it a birth defect?
nobody really knows for sure.
Okay.
But the person I based him on, who was in my family, we still don't know what he's now deceased, but he had scarlet fever when he was a baby. This was in the 1930s, um, so there wasn't as much talk about these things, and in fact, there was some shame about them in that generation, and so he knows some things. Um, yeah, Forge had a sensitivity read done on the book for that, but it all worked out just fine. And so there are characters from their past who add little bits and pieces of information. They find some things that add more information.
Right.
So they really are become amateur sleuths in this situation. Uh, the police have ruled their brother's death in Chicago a natural causes, but the more weird things they find up in northern Minnesota, the more everything comes into question.
Right. So one of the things I liked was there's a pretty big age range in your characters. I mean, they go all the way from senior down to a couple of bright young things.
Yes. Yeah, and uh, that's another thing that I've noticed in smaller towns, there can be less division in ages because there's fewer people and people are all kind of in it together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I know it. I love small town. I mean, this
yeah,
is sort of an English village mystery transplanted to, let me see
yeah.
if I can say it, Leech Lake. Yay!
Leech Lake.
Leech Lake,
Yeah,
Minnesota, right.
yeah. Which you can go swimming in and not come out with leeches
Now,
stuck. Yeah.
why is it called Leech Lake?
Well,
Do we
because
know?
there are or were some leeches,
Actual
but they're
leeches?
way at the bottom. Like that. That's what the Minnesota's famous fish is, the walleye,
Right.
and that's what they
I
often
love
eat.
walleye.
Yeah.
So, have I told you that last summer we decided to take a cruise to the Great
I
Lakes?
remember you were
All
going to do
right.
that.
So, we
Yeah.
started in Duluth.
Ah.
So, we went early.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated. We were in this gorgeous old hotel, like a big lodge,
Yeah.
right on the lake.
It's
I
beautiful.
mean, really right on the
Yeah.
lake. And we had a chance to drive around and up Lake Superior. I mean, eventually we did it on the ship,
Yeah.
but we drove a long way up, and there's I think it's a raptor or a hawk center,
Mm-hmm.
a refuge place up
Yeah. Did
there.
you go up by Two Harbors? Do you remember that?
Yeah,
And Grand Marais is.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the
Mm-hmm.
actual ship, they were mostly on the Canadian side,
Yeah.
and down big
Thunder
part.
Bay.
Yep, all
Yeah.
of that, and then in Lake Huron, they also were much more on the Canadian side. So it was sort of weird because we had to keep going through passport control in order to, to do this trip.
Yeah.
But then eventually, from Lake Huron, they came into the Detroit River, and down to Detroit, and then across to Cleveland, and then back up the Welland Canal, and we ended up in Toronto. So we
Yeah.
were in and out of
Yeah.
the borders. But I had never been to Lake Superior, so I was fascinated by
Yeah.
it.
It's almost an ocean.
It
It's so
really is.
yeah.
It was no different being on.
Yeah.
This was Viking that we were on, and it wasn't any different than really being on an ocean cruise when you were in Lake Superior. It was, and there's some. We didn't suffer through one, but there are certainly epic storms.
There are.
Steve Hamilton used to,
Oh yeah.
his books from the other side,
Yes.
from the Michigan, the UP side,
Yeah.
would talk
Southern
about.
Shore. Yeah.
Right. Would talk about, the storms.
Hmm.
But anyway, I was fascinated with Duluth, but the reason I started saying all that was because we lived on walleye for like 3 days.
Yeah.
That was everywhere we
Yeah.
went. That was the big dish of the restaurant was walleye, which I
Yeah.
love. I remember at the St. Paul BoucherCon, the first one, years and years ago. BoucherCon is the International Mystery Convention where people come from all over. And I remember being in a restaurant and the walleye was covered in pecans. It
Hmm.
had butter and pecan. It was so good. Because honestly, growing up on Lake Michigan, when in the 1940s, we never
Right.
ate fish.
Right.
I mean, you didn't.
No, yeah.
I mean, we didn't get them out of the lake, and it was way too early for people to be
Right.
like here now, where you can have fish flown in every day from,
Yeah.
California or something. We eat oysters as a normal thing here in
Right.
Phoenix now. But so I'm not really wasn't that used to fish, and the walleye was a real surprise to me.
Yeah. It's. I mean, it's this country's so big, and there's all these little subcultures all over the place, and it's fun to explore the Minnesota one. And one of the bigger questions I get from Minnesotans is like, "We love this, but does anyone else get it?" And I actually get more attention for my books from outside of Minnesota.
Really?
And I get a lot of emails where people say, "Oh, I want to come visit there," and I say, "Come in the summer." Um, but I think it's just because as readers, we all like to be taken to other worlds and other places, whether they're real or not real. Um, it is quaint. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So the other trip that we took in the last 2 years was
Mhm.
the Upper Mississippi, which was advertised as being from St. Paul to St. Louis, but was actually from Red Wing, Minnesota
Yeah.
to Altona, Illinois, because the ship, they're too small or whatever
Right.
to actually dock at in the bigger
Right.
bigger war. So we discovered, because we were at the Minnesota BoucherCon this time. Minnesota hosts a lot of conventions, as
Yes.
it all turns out.
Yeah.
That we we thought we were right where we were going to get on the ship while we were in the hotel in
Yeah.
Minneapolis, and it turned out we had to get to Red Wings. So
Yeah.
Uber to the rescue.
Oh
And
yeah.
it was a really nice drive over there, and
Yeah,
a
it's
very
beautiful.
quaint old town, and the nice little wharfage along the river, and it was great.
The southeast corner of Minnesota, along with northeast Iowa and southwest Wisconsin, is called the driftless area
Mhm.
because when the glaciers came down, they did not go through that area. So it didn't get flattened like the rest of the Midwest. So it's full of these beautiful bluffs and
Yeah, the
streams.
Wisconsin Dells, all that.
Yes, all of that. And that is where I am hoping to set my 2026 book
Ah,
in southeast Minnesota.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can really recommend the. Maybe you should think about a river mystery because I'm
But
telling you that was an absolutely terrific
yeah.
week from. And one of the things I learned, which was I was so surprised, is that the Mississippi is dammed. The Army Corps of Engineers,
Hmm.
has and. And so I wondered why, because I thought flood control on the upper Mississippi didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it
Right.
turned out it's to keep the 15-foot channel 15 feet deep
Right.
so that it doesn't impede all the barge traffic and all.
Yeah.
But I mean, how many people actually know stuff like that? You could
Yeah.
put a body in
Mark
a
Twain
barge.
knew it.
Yes, you
Yeah.
could. But
Yes.
yeah, no, I know. Marking on the Twain and the
Yeah.
whole bit. But
And
that was more
actually,
the lower Mississippi,
right.
wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, Missouri mostly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we were
Yeah.
there actually. We were in Hannibal for
Yes.
a day. But I was thinking that
I've been
there
there
would
too.
be some
Yeah.
really interesting things you could do with a body in terms of barges and other things
Yeah.
on the.
Uh,
It's an underused mystery resource, the Upper Mississippi. So
yeah.
I'm pitching it out
All
there.
right.
Um, I mean, really,
Yeah, and I agree.
Kent did one of his books in Lake
Oh.
Superior, the third book, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it was a shipwreck on the.
But he also used the Minnesota River quite a bit in this tender land. Yeah.
He did, right.
Yes.
And Nevada Barr wrote one of her books on Isle Royal.
Yeah.
Isle Royale, actually, which
it
is,
is Royale.
and
Yeah.
pointed out how unbelievably deep it involved a sunken ship and treasure, which I
Yeah.
won't
Lake
reveal in
Superior
case
is
anybody wants to read it.
full of shipwrecks.
Yep, and some
Yeah.
of them had, really nifty cargoes.
Yeah.
Maybe pirates?
I don't know if Lake Superior. I think it was too cold for pirates.
Well, just making suggestions here. But anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, because there are underutilized areas for crime fiction, so I'm suggesting
Yes.
a couple here. in case
Well,
you
there
wanna
will
do that.
definitely be rivers in my southeast Minnesota book. I don't know if
Okay.
it'll be the Mississippi, but there will. I already know there will be other
But see, I
rivers.
think most people's idea of the Mississippi is really the lower Mississippi. They're
Yeah.
thinking plantations and Mark Twain and, all the rest of it. The upper Mississippi
Yeah.
is
Well, not far from Leech Lake is where the actual Mississippi starts.
that around
and there is a
Hackensack?
point where you can. Well, it's in Itasca,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, my sister
And there is
went
a
to
point
camp.
where you can jump over.
Exactly. My
Yeah.
sister went to camp in Hackensack when
Oh,
she was a
yeah.
kid, and I remember her saying, that they'd
Yeah.
gone out and jumped over the
And if
Mississippi.
you don't make it, you end up in New Orleans. You just go all the way down.
I love that. That's a really all right. Well, I don't
Yeah.
know that there's much else we can say about Still Waters because we just totally
Yeah.
ruined the story.
Yeah.
I love the characters, it's very funny despite the tragic things that happen. There's some, one of the things I've always loved about Matt's books is his humor. And your dialogue is so good. Does that
Thank
come
you.
from your television background?
I think so. I mean, I mean, when I was a young TV writer, I really tried to pay attention to how people talk, and write that down as an exercise. I would go in a coffee shop and just eavesdrop and write what people were saying, not because I was interested in what they were saying, but how they were saying it, and so that part of my career definitely carried forward into my novel writing. Yeah.
Well, how about questions? What would any of you like to ask?
Oh, yeah.
But I guess I do.
Yeah.
How did the transition happen between TV to your novels?
How did the transition happen between TV and novels? I had always wanted to write novels. In TV, they keep you very busy and they pay you. So it's hard to jump. But I was working in comedy, and comedy was starting to change. And the short version of the story is uh, when shows like The Wire and Breaking Bad and Mad Men and The Good Wife and The Closer, when all these shows came out that kind of started the second golden age of television, TV became the it thing all of a sudden. It used to be movies were the it thing, and if you can't work in movies, you work in TV. But TV became the it thing, but they were all dramas. Um, and and dramas were getting all the attention, and the people in charge of comedy thought we want to have attention too. We want to be recognized. So they tried to make comedy cool, which it just doesn't work. I mean, if you look at the great comedic characters in TV like Ralph Cramden and Lucy and George Costanza and Fraser Crane, they're a bunch of idiots. They're not cool. But they're very human, and that's why we love them. They represent our flaws and insecurities. Um, and when they tried to make TV cool, it kind of got slicker and jokier and not as human. And so I wanted to move to drama because I thought that's where the better work's being done. And to do my homework for drama, I started reading crime fiction. I'd always been a big reader, but not a crime fiction person, and I just fell in love with it. Because one of the reasons I fell in love with it is when you have a crime at the center of your story, there's a built-in engine to the story, and it kind of pushes things forward, and it frees up time to focus just on your characters as people and on their relationships, because the phone's going to ring and someone's going to say, we got the prints off the gun or whatever it is, and it's just going to keep moving forward. And after reading it for a few years, I had this break between two TV shows. I had 4 months, and I just sat down and wrote Gone to Dust. It just came out of me, and it changed my life. It really. I'm quite introverted. I like working alone, and and I just fell in love with novel writing. So the first one I wrote in those 4 months. The next two I was working full time on TV shows, but after that I just moved full time to book writing. Yeah.
That's a really good point about comedy. How context matters so much. Do you
Yeah.
remember when Laugh-In came out? Any of you remember that? And it
Oh
was
yeah.
hilarious for the first year. Do you remember the Nina the Pinta and the Santa Maria sailing along?
Yeah.
Whatever it all was. But it's the thing about comedy is that you have to keep upping it, or people it goes flat.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to.
Yeah.
It turns
The
into
key is-
caricature pretty fast.
Well, if you can get those characters to the point where your audience falls in love with them, then the story almost doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
They just want those characters.
Yeah, I know, like
Yeah.
Lucy, which was,
Yes.
didn't, but I remember George Goebbels, how, great he was
Yeah.
when I still remember him sitting on the branch, he had a tree and he was sitting out on a branch and he had a saw. And so he was sawing
Right.
away and then the branch fell
Yeah.
down and so did he,
Yeah.
and that was the kind of thing that was really funny then. But, exactly.
But and comedy's so character dependent
Yep.
that I think that's where I get my, how I draw my
Yeah.
characters in my books.
But it's true. People who write comedic mystery rather than having humor part of the mystery,
Right.
like you, that happens too. That they have to keep upping their game, and after a while, it gets really tiresome.
Yeah.
The joke is kind of over, or it turns into caricature of
Yes.
itself. And I think humor is so hard to sustain over a long period.
If you're just going for the laugh,
Yeah.
it is. But humor is a real natural human reaction to stress,
Right.
to a tense situation, to a sad situation. I mean, I I really wanted to write books. I wasn't quite sure how I would do it, and then when I read Chandler, who had Philip Marlowe, who narrated with a wry sense of humor, great social observation, but not funny stories at all.
Right.
Then I thought, oh, I'm not comparing myself to Raymond Chandler at all. Okay, I am, and he's way better than I am. But I saw how I could use my comedic voice for a character to tell a more serious story. Yeah.
I'm looking for a line because I can't remember it exactly. Ask another question.
Yeah.
While I look for this. No?
I'm
You
just
don't.
curious
Yeah.
how you came up with characters. Like, how did you come up with these Irish twins?
Oh, where to? I don't know. I had wanted to write about siblings. I think those relationships are not only special but also quite complex because when we're very little, our parents can't watch us 24 hours a day, and we are left alone with our siblings, and that's how we kind of work out what the world is and what other people are. But we're very vulnerable when that's happening. You know, we're toddlers sometimes. And so this pecking order and these dynamics are forged at such an early age, they're almost impossible to overcome as an adult, if the negative parts of them. And so I wanted to have these two characters, Gabe and Liv, have this giant hurdle of this of this conflict that was forged when they were young and malleable. And they have to kind of overcome it to do this investigation or work through it or work with it. And that's really where that idea came from. Yeah.
I can't find it. It
Okay.
goes along with the Minnesota's being nice. Do you remember how it goes on from there?
Well, is it the first paragraph of the book?
No, it's
Because
the
that's
line
the
where
one.
they go on to say that, you know, the unpleasant Minnesota would be your average maitre d' of New York.
Yeah.
I absolutely love
Oh,
it.
they
I
do.
quoted it in what I wrote to you, but yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't find it.
They yeah, they're going to talk to someone who another person tells them is not so pleasant. And as a New Yorker in LA, they say they have lines. I can't remember. One they said that's your average maitre d',
The other
and
one said in Hollywood
we
you
call
call
them producers. Yeah, yeah.
I know,
I
but,
can't remember where in the book that is.
but you know, here's an example of how of why I think Matt is such an interest.
You should probably do the mic so the
Oh,
people
sorry.
at home can. Yes.
Beg your pardon, I put it
Yeah.
down, right. Okay, well, this is Gabe talking, and he says his sister, Liv, took her eye off the sky and looked at her brother. Have you ever felt something's wrong in your life? I mean, like something's fundamentally wrong? Like it's in your bones? Like you're bad at life? Well, yeah, said Gabe. I'm 37 years old, have never been in a long-term relationship, live paycheck to paycheck, and see no chance of things getting better. Is that what you mean? And, you know, I mean, it's a terrible situation that he's in,
Yeah.
but the way you present that, it's not, you know, bitter, he's not whining.
That's his reality.
It is his reality, you know, and he's very realistic, but at the same time, you know, he's not trying to make her feel guilty. He's not, you
Right.
know, whining. He's not angry, and I think that that's the tone of the book, really,
Yeah.
except at the end. Right. All right. Anybody else have a question? Patrick, are there any online questions? No.
As a matter of
Oh.
fact, there are.
Oh,
Oh.
good. Come out and tell
Oh.
us.
Can you hear me through the?
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah.
you. If
We
you
have
Okay.
a local.
We
question
do,
first.
but let me.
About my process.
Because
Oh.
let me
Go
come
ahead,
out.
Patrick, and then we'll answer the process
Yeah.
question. No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Let me read them on the screen through the wall, if that's okay.
All right.
Yeah.
He goes. He disappears. He's like the Wizard of
Very-
Oz.
Very fancy here. Yeah, Barbara would like to know: are any of your books set in Southwest Minnesota, perhaps in or around Mankato?
Not yet, but I would love to set a book in Southwest
Right.
Minnesota.
Mr. Sanford does that, though. I think the Virgil Flowers are down in that area, if I remember right.
Yeah, and so are Alan Eskin's books. Yeah. But
So is the river we remember.
and so is the yes. And so is the book before that, I believe, around Blue Earth. Kent standalone. Yeah.
And then follow up to that is kind of random question. Do you fly fish?
Yes,
Ah,
I do fly fish, and southeast Minnesota is has some of the best trout streams in the country. Yeah, and that will be part of that book I set down there. Yeah,
A change from walleye.
yeah, yeah.
I love
Yes.
it. Right.
Yeah.
and finally, there was somebody asking about your TV work and
Mhm.
what are some of the shows that you wrote for and so forth.
I started on Seinfeld, so that I was 26, and some of the better known shows I worked on was that I worked on Ellen, the sitcom. I worked on it the year before she came out, and the year she came out, which was a big deal back then. It was before Will and Grace. I worked on The New Adventures of Old Christine. I worked on one kid show that a lot of people know called The Wizards of Waverly Place. I worked on a lot of shows, some good, some not good. Um,
Was it almost always in a writer's room?
almost always, yeah. And I'd learned so much from really smart writers. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Sorry, we interrupted you.
Yeah.
What was your question?
Oh, my process is, like I said earlier, I know very little when I start, and I write early in the morning and go as long as it takes, and I have a word count, and I feel quite compelled to hit that word count. It doesn't happen every single day, but most days it does, and like for example today. My book came out today. There's a ton of stuff going on social media. There's a lot of communication.
Right, we're drinking afterwards.
Yes, we are.
Sorry.
And I was really focused on getting my 1,500 words written today. And it's not for the next book or the book after that or the book after that. It's for 4 books from now. And I thought maybe there's something wrong with me because it's the day that this book is coming out. But that's what I do, and I wouldn't be able to just sit down and start with a notion if I hadn't done all those episodes of TV. About
Yeah, no,
500.
you had a terrific training.
Yeah.
For novel writing.
Yeah, so I can feel when the story's getting off or going in the wrong direction. And when that happens, sometimes I have to stop for a day or two and figure it out. But it is pretty much a 7-day-a-week thing I do. And then sometimes I have to stop because I'll get notes from my editor on the previous book, and then I have to set it aside and address those. And but I treat it like a full-time job. Yeah.
So it's important to really know structure, story structure, and also pacing. And I think that TV, would
Yeah.
certainly help you with that.
And I don't think about structure that much. I just try to.
No, but you already
Yeah.
know it,
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I think it probably is just intuitive for
Yeah.
you by now.
Yeah.
But pacing is another thing, how to, they're always, who was it that Elmore Leonard, I think it was? But anyway, somebody said, I take out the words, it was Elmore Leonard.
It was.
I
Elmore
take
Leonard.
out the words that readers skip.
Yeah.
And that's why he had so many movies made of
Yeah.
his novels because they were so dialogue driven. Robert Parker was like that too.
Yeah.
You could
And Lee
read.
Child as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, no adverbs and, keep it moving. And dialogue is probably one of the most propulsive,
It is.
things.
And I've heard Tony Kushner, the playwright, say it, but I don't know if he originated it. But dialogue is action. It really is. It really does move things.
You could read a Parker, and I love Bob. I
Yeah.
read him in real time because I'm so
Right,
old, and we
yeah.
were friends, and all the rest. He used to come out. We go drinking at the Biltmore, and he hated doing book events. He really didn't like them.
Yeah.
But he would come here, and on the last time, because he died not too long afterward,
Right.
last time he was here, he had just been named the Grand Master from the Mystery Writers of America. So we'd had a drink or two. And we sat down, and the store was, mobbed in the whole bit. Now, usually
Right.
he was trying to move out like 30 minutes, and
Right.
he was, all the rest of it. An hour and 10 minutes in, And we had, like a signing light was going on forever. And so I started sort of trying to, in an hour and a half, I finally said to him, Bob, we're going to, and he was just, and he looked around at everybody and he said, "You can call me Grandmaster Bob," he said.
Oh, that's nice.
So I wrote to his publisher the next
Yeah.
day because, I knew them well. And I said, "So last night," I said, "in an hour and a half, I had to hook Bob off stage while he was saying, call me Grandmaster Bob." And they wrote back and they said, "Now you had some other Robert B. Parker there last night." It was so, I was so happy for him that he lived long enough for the Red
Yeah.
Sox to win a pennant.
Oh,
That game 7, I would
Oh,
go
boy.
back and forth to my computer because it was really before phones were all that good. And, and Bob and I would update because I was a Cubs fan. And, we had both,
Right.
when we were drinking, we would say, would either of us
Yeah.
ever live long enough to see
Yeah.
either the Cubs or the Red Sox win a pennant? And we would go back and we would go back. And finally, when the game was over, I went down and opened up my email. And here's Bob Parker, master of dialogue. And his email was, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, love Bob."
That's great.
I wish I saved it,
Yeah.
But I mean, but dialogue he was just a
Oh, yeah.
genius at dialogue.
Yes.
Whole pages of it sometimes, with almost no connecting
Right.
stuff. It was amazing. Right. Well, yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Just kind of as a follow-up to his question.
Yeah.
You write a certain amount every day. Do you have a place where you write, or are you just wherever
Well,
you are?
when I'm home, I have a home office, and that's where I work. But today I wrote on an airplane. I wrote in an airport. I wrote in a hotel room. I can do it anywhere. But I'm not. I'm not one of those writers who goes to a coffee shop on a regular basis, which William Kent Kruger is.
No, not so much anymore.
Well, he has to go somewhere else.
Right, but
yeah.
he started out in the coffee shop
Yeah.
because of the kids. He
Yeah.
would go early in the morning to write in the coffee
Yeah.
shop while his wife got the kids up.
Yeah,
And so he got used to it and the background noise.
yeah, and my kids are older now. I also am a big believer in headphones. I own many pair, and but I usually work at home. But again, I can do it pretty much anywhere. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much
Yeah,
for coming.
thank you for coming.
Virtual audience.
Thanks.
A toast. Actually, we're going out and have a celebratory dinner
Yes, we are.
when we are down here. And so I didn't bring any wine to give you a little salute.
Oh,
We'll
that's
do that
okay.
later. But congratulations. This
Thank
is
you.
Publication Day, and I'm so glad that you came to share it with us.
Oh, I'm honored to be here.
Always a
I
pleasure. So
always-
good night,
yeah.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
And if you all would like to get a book signed and take photos and stuff, Matt is in a perfect place for that. We'll just leave him right there. Let me grab that.